Frost in places as we start off Wednesday, with temperatures in the low single figures or in some shelter spots just below freezing. But those showers will be continuing around Irish Sea coasts into the north of Scotland, Northern Ireland. 1 or 2 expected for North Sea coasts as well. But away from the showers, plenty of clear or sunny spells expected throughout Wednesday. The brisker breeze coming all the way from the north will feel on the cold side, and it will feel particularly chilly if you're exposed to that wind on the North Sea coast. But inland, shelter from the breeze, sunshine. It's looking like a fine, bright day for many, so temperatures of 9 to 11 Celsius won't feel too bad. A similar day to come on Thursday, perhaps fewer showers later as we progress into the afternoon. And then by Friday, many of the showers die away. It turns a bit milder, but it will also turn more unsettled in the far northwest.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for the Political Correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is the Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
Hi, I'm Patrick Christies.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
And we're hosting a show right here on GB News, 9:30am till 12pm, every single weekday, called To The Point.
We're going to be talking about all the big issues that matter to you at home in Britain.
Absolutely, whether it's holding politicians to account, discussing what's taking place in the Channel, banging on about law and order, we're not afraid to do the absolute lot of it.
Yes, and if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we'll be saying it.
Make sure you're here 9:30am till 12pm, every single weekday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
Hello and welcome to The Briefing with me, Gloria de Piero. Lots coming up today, including COP. Is it a flop? The Prime Minister wanted action on coal, cars, cash and trees. Well, 1 out of 4 ain't bad. We talked to a former Environment Secretary about the PM's deal on deforestation. Plus, my exclusive interview with Shadow Trade Secretary Emily Thornberry, who reveals the difficult relationship she had with the dad who walked out on her when she was little, but who she ended up caring for in old age. But first, it's the news with Rosie Wright.
Good afternoon. Let's get you up to date at 12 o'clock. 105 countries, including Brazil, Canada and Russia, are going to sign a deal pledging to end and reverse deforestation by 2030. It's going to be the first major agreement at the COP26 summit. When combined, the full list of signatories will represent 85% of the world's forests. Boris Johnson described the pledge as a chance to end humanity's long history as nature's conqueror and instead become its custodian.
Let's channel funds towards securing the rights of indigenous peoples and local communities and shift trillions towards supporting sustainable jobs, so that protecting our forests is not only the right course of action to tackle climate change, but the right course for a more prosperous future for us all.
2 Metropolitan Police officers have pleaded guilty to misconduct in public office after they shared images of the bodies of 2 murdered women. PC Dennis Jaffa and PC Jamie Lewis took photos of the murdered sisters Bieber Henry and Nicole Smallman on WhatsApp while they were protecting a police cordon. Speaking outside the Old Bailey, Mina Smallman was asked if Met Commissioner Dame Cressida Dick should resign.
Yeah. And, you know, whenever I was in a senior position, If my organisation or department failed, it was on me. It was on me. I had to take the can for it. Well, it's now time for them to take the can for it.
The Environment Secretary, George Eustice, says that a British scallop trawler has now been released after being held by French authorities. Well, it comes after France backed down in a dispute over French vessels fishing in British waters. The French president warned they could block British boats from its ports from today if they failed to issue more licences to French fishermen. Speaking to GB News, the Environment Secretary said any action by France would have been a breach of the Brexit agreement.
Those threats to deliberately create border disruption and prevent UK vessels going into French ports would have been a breach of the agreement we've got with the European Union, and probably would have breached elements of EU law as well. They only have to demonstrate that they've got a track record of working, at least one day a year over a 4-year period of accessing our waters. The vast majority have been able to demonstrate that with the records that they have.
Insulate Britain has begun staging demonstrations outside the southeast of England for the first time today. Around 60 protesters disrupted traffic in Manchester, Birmingham and London this morning. It's the 8th consecutive week they've held the demonstrations. Well, 9 protesters from the group have now been told they face committal proceedings over the breaking of injunctions granted to national highways. The price of fuel has gone up by 27% over the last 12 months. An average litre of petrol now costs 143.7 pence. That's 30 pence more than last November and the highest price ever recorded. Well, that means it now costs around £17 more to fill up a typical family car. The increase in fuel prices has been driven by the cost of oil doubling in the past year. Some MPs are calling for the rollout of smart motorways to be suspended because of safety concerns. The scheme, which uses the hard shoulder as a permanent traffic lane, has been criticised by the Commons Transport Select Committee. Concerns were raised after multiple incidents involving fatalities where broken-down vehicles were hit by other drivers from behind. Yesterday, demonstrators protested against smart motorways by marching to the Houses of Parliament. You are up to date here on GB News. I'll have more in half an hour. Right now, back to the briefing with Gloria.
Thanks, Rosie. We've got a packed show for you today. Coming up this hour on The Briefing, the Prime Minister's got a deal on trees at COP26. Hooray. More than 100 world leaders have promised to end deforestation by 2030. But is that deal anything like enough to tackle climate change? We talked to a former Environment Secretary. Plus, after faulty electrics in a pub cost a little boy his life, we talked to the MP campaigning for a change in the law to bring in regular checks on wiring in pubs. And we're talking endometriosis, the crippling condition that affects 1 in 10 women, with the MP campaigning to raise awareness of the condition. And we'll have the latest in my special series of interviews, The Real Me, where we meet the person behind the politics. Today, Shadow Trade Secretary Emily Thornberry talks father figures, social class and white van men. Give me your political briefing. Send in your views and opinions by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me @gbnews. First, our top story, COP26, and the Prime Minister's managed to secure a deal on deforestation. More than 100 world leaders have promised to end and reverse deforestation by 2030. But lest we forget, this is just one plank of the Prime Minister's 4-pronged call to action: coal, cars, cash, trees. So that's trees off the list at least, but is it enough? Joining me now is the former Environment Secretary, who was there under David Cameron when the government tried to sell off the forests, and until 2019, the Tory MP for Meriden, Caroline Spellman. Welcome to the programme. It's very nice to see you, Caroline.
Thank you, Gloria. Glad to be here. Glad to be with you.
So the news this morning of an end to deforestation by 2030, in your view, how significant is this?
Yeah, this is good news, and it's really important. I thought he probably would succeed in, as you put it, ticking that one on the list? Because I think it's very real to people, isn't it? That if you can tackle deforestation, it's one of the primary causes of climate change. It's a man-made thing where we chop down trees and burn them and we put carbon dioxide up into the atmosphere. But I think really important out of that deal that the government has got today is that Brazil is party to it. So, home of the Amazon rainforest, incredibly important in terms of sinking carbon, protecting the climate, but also for its rich biodiversity. So actually having Brazil on board for this commitment is very important, because you'll recall that they have been really going backwards in terms of logging trees in the Amazon forest and on its periphery. I went to see that myself, actually, when I was Environment Secretary. We actually committed money during the negotiations for the United Nations Biodiversity Agreement. You have to actually be prepared to pay farmers so that they have an income and are not then attracted to cut down trees to make a sustainable living. So this is a really good piece of news today.
Now, COP26 goes on for 2 weeks, but world leaders leave today. That's confusing for most people. Can you explain how this works? Are most of the deals done on this before it actually even starts?
Some are, some aren't. There's a lot of work in summitry, and a lot of, for example, civil servants will work very hard in the months and weeks running up to a United Nations conventions like this, but actually finally clinching the deal on something like 100 countries agreeing to tackle deforestation and put real money behind that commitment, often that takes the world leaders to just finally seal the deal, if you like. But there are 2 more weeks to go. But the important thing is that there is now some momentum at this climate change COP hosted by us in Glasgow. That's very important for the days that follow it.
Some people are surprised with what they see as Boris Johnson's new conversion to the environment. You would know him, you would have been colleagues. Actually, is that criticism unfair? Has he always been committed to this agenda, or is it indeed a new thing for him?
I think it is unfair, because remember, he's his father's son, and Stanley Johnson, his dad, is an out-and-out campaigner as an environmentalist. And Boris will have grown up in a family where protecting the environment was considered really important. So this is not this is not a Johnny-come-lately position. He is committed to do this, and he completely understands, as a head of state in one of the richest countries in the world, that this is something that we as wealthier nations have to help the poorer nations with. He's committed to that as well, and let's face it, he's getting some momentum.
But did you find, and how much will he find, resistance from some Tory colleagues on this? So this new coalition of Tory voters, to caricature this new coalition, you might say that posher Tories will be quite keen on this agenda, whilst your new working class voters might not really like being hectored and being told what to do.
Well, I think it's a much more complex picture. Actually, the research organisation I've been chairing some work on, called Onward, has got some polling coming out next week, and it's not as simple as that characterisation. The important thing to remember is there's been big progress amongst public in terms of 70% of people now believe we need to tackle climate change. So we've moved quite a long way in having that in one of the top 3 issues that the public want to see their politicians tackle. I think the really important thing now is to understand what it takes to get to what's known as net zero, decarbonising your economy. That's really important in seats like the one I represented for 22 years, because I live in the heart of the manufacturing belt. So here in the manufacturing belt, a commitment to net zero, taking carbon out of our economy, has a big impact. But it also presents a big opportunity. Again, Onward has estimated that 1.7 million green jobs could be created out of that commitment to take carbon out of the economy. In practice, for example, the car industry switching away from fossil fuel driven cars to electric cars. So, there are both problems and opportunities, but it's very important, I think, politicians level with the public so that they take the public with them in this commitment to net zero.
But so for example, if we take banning the sale of new petrol and diesel cars by 2030, if not many people can afford a £100,000 Tesla. Let's just put it out there. It's going to be difficult, isn't it?
Well, you don't have to buy a £100,000 Tesla. There are British manufacturers of British cars who sell electric cars for less than that. And actually, to be fair to India, India has innovated with an electric car that is significantly cheaper because obviously it's a nation where consumers have less disposable income to send. But what the signal did of banning petrol and diesel in cars by 2030 was drive innovation in the car industry. It was coming, but it's forced it to accelerate. And in fact, we're in a global race to be a major producer of electric cars. The more of them you produce, like all consumer goods, the more they come down in price. So, this is a very important part of our transition to net zero, is to be a key player in the production of electric cars and actually transferring the whole of public transport onto a net zero basis.
Caroline Spellman, it's good of you to join us today. It's been engaging to talk to you. Nice to see you. Now, we're hearing Insulate Britain has spread to Manchester, with protesters gluing themselves to the road. Our North West reporter, Bradley Harris, is there for us. Bradley, what's the latest?
Yeah, that's right. From 8:30 this morning, around 11 Insulate Britain protesters turned up to Wilmslow Road in Manchester, near Manchester Airport, a very busy road. You can see that there's probably around, well, in fact, I can see 4 Insulate Britain protesters currently with their hands glued to the floor. There's officers using specialised equipment to get their hands off the ground. There's around, say, 6 or 7 police vans, huge police presence here now, but traffic is still moving. Just a few moments ago, an Insulate Britain protester was actually taken away in handcuffs. And you can see police officers behind me. They are actually trying to remove their hands from the ground using paintbrushes and some other specialised equipment to remove them from the floor. This is Insulate Britain's message to try and get outside of London, and they're doing it here in Manchester.
Really interesting, Bradley. Thanks very much indeed for bringing us that report live. Thank you. Now, if you're one of the 1.5 million women diagnosed with endometriosis in the UK, you'll know how painful and exhausting the condition can be, and that the average wait time from first going to the doctors to getting a diagnosis is on average a huge 7.5 years. Now, a public petition demanding more funding into research has been debated by MPs. Well, to tell us more, I'm delighted to be joined by Emma Hardy, Labour MP for Hull West and Hessel. She worked closely with Sir David Amess, who, of course, was murdered just last month, to produce an all-parliamentary report on the condition. Emma, good to see you on GB News again. If I can just look at the petition that was called on by the public, endometriosis and polycystic ovary syndrome, 2 gynecological conditions which both affect 10% of women worldwide. But the petition calls for more funding to enable new, extensive and thorough research into female health issues. Why is it underfunded?
Very good question. And we wouldn't want to assume that it's just because it's a condition that seems to impact women. But we don't even understand yet what causes endometriosis. We have no idea why some people get the condition and some people don't. There's no real treatment for it. And the treatment that there is, your choices are either going through the menopause early, forced medical menopause, having someone go in and physically scrape away the endometriosis from your organs, or using various other hormonal methods as well, or having a hysterectomy. I mean, these are not fair ways to treat a condition that, as you said, impact 1.5 million women. So one of the things we want research in is what causes this condition and what's the best way to treat it.
Why are GPs so poor at diagnosing the condition?
Well, one of the things we said was we need to make more awareness of the condition, because there are still going to be lots of people going, endo what? What's endometriosis? I've never heard of it. And this is the same, it has to be said, amongst some healthcare professionals as well. And we have to remember that some people in healthcare may have trained an awfully long time ago, therefore not maybe as aware of the condition as they might be. And this is part of what our group wants to do, is to shout about endometriosis, make people aware of it. And that also means changing education, teaching children what's a normal period and what's an unnormal period. Because we've got so many people growing up thinking it's normal to bleed as heavily as they do with endo, and it simply isn't.
And how do you treat it? You said that there is really no way of treating it at the moment, but that beggars belief in itself, doesn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. So you can treat it through taking medicines which give you, put you through the menopause early. So if you imagine, if you're a young woman and you have this condition, you're looking in the future at having children, and you're told the only way you can stop living with pain is by going through a menopause early, which of course impacts your mood, impacts the way you feel. It's a pretty horrific choice. Or the alternative is a surgeon goes in and physically scrapes away the endometriosis inside you, and you're left with a long recovery period and an awful lot of pain. I mean, these aren't fair choices that women are being given.
And you are chair of the all-parliamentary group on endometriosis. Just tell us, why are you campaigning on this? What is your personal interest?
Well, it was raised by a constituent who came to me and told me about her condition, and she told me about how long it had taken her to be diagnosed and how she felt ignored and belittled and told, oh, just get on with it. It's just period pains. Why are you making a fuss? And she kept having to go back to A&E, and she was feeling almost suicidal with the difficulties she was facing. And I thought this was awful. And then when I found out it's 1 in 10 women, there are millions of women feeling like this, and yet no one seems to know about it. There's no research, there's little awareness, there's no treatment. I mean, this is appalling. So it's become an issue I care an awful lot about, because I think we all need to shout about women's health louder.
While I have you, Emma, may I ask you about the vote in Parliament tomorrow over the suspension of Owen Paterson, the former Environment Secretary, who's been sanctioned by a cross-party group of MPs for, it is alleged, lobbying repeatedly for 2 companies that were paying him more than £100,000 a year. Isn't it a bit odd that MPs actually vote on these things? Doesn't that in itself risk damaging trust in the Committee on Standards in Public Life?
Well, absolutely. It's marking your own homework, isn't it? I mean, the whole point of having an independent panel is the independent panel makes a decision and determines the sanctions, and MPs really shouldn't have a say in it, because it shouldn't be about whether or not we personally, like Owen Paterson or how we personally feel about him. It should be about, these are the rules, you broke the rules, these are the consequences. In any other workplace, that would be the case.
Emma Hardy, pleasure to talk to you. Thank you for your time today. After the break, after faulty wiring in a local pub beer garden tragically killed a 7-year-old boy, we talked to the MP seeking to change the law and bring in mandatory electric checks in pubs. But first, it's the weather.
Hello again. Plenty of bright blue skies today. Sunny spells for many, especially inland. There will be further showers, however, particularly near the coast. And it will feel cold in the wind and chilly overnight with a touch of frost in places. Low pressure still close by. It's to the north of the UK and we're dragging in this colder northwesterly airflow, but the isobars less tightly packed compared to Monday, and so less blustery, less unsettled on the whole, and for many it's a fine bright day with plenty of sunshine. Showers inland, I think, particularly for the Midlands, southern and southeast England, perhaps northeast England as well. Showers fairly few and far between. They'll mostly be appearing into northern and western coastal areas, and in that blustery breeze it will feel on the cool side, 9 to 13 Celsius typically. Under clear skies then, temperatures fall away overnight, a touch of frost forming in places. But further showers will feed into northern and western coasts, and some more prolonged rain at times for northeast Scotland, and then that sinking south into Aberdeenshire on a brisk breeze. Frost-free in the north with that breeze, but otherwise temperatures dipping to 1 to 3 Celsius typically inland, perhaps -1 in some sheltered spots. So chilly starts to Wednesday, frost first thing, a few fog patches for the Midlands, southern and southeast England. Soon enough though, this area of cloud and some fairly prolonged showers pushes through parts of eastern England, reaching East Anglia by the afternoon. That brisk breeze in the North Sea will feel cold, and it will be breezy in the west with further showers here. But inland, central slice of the UK, seeing a lot more dry and bright weather with some sunshine. The showers continue to topple south across East Anglia into southeast England on Wednesday evening. Eventually, most of the showers die away. Still some for West Wales, Devon, Cornwall, northern Scotland, but another frosty night in store and a chilly start once again on Thursday. Cloudier skies appear on Friday, turning unsettled in the northwest.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for the political correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is the political correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
Hi, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
And we're hosting a show right here on GB News, 9:30am till 12pm, every single weekday, called To The Point.
We're going to be talking about all the big issues that matter to you at home in Britain.
Absolutely, whether it's holding politicians to account, discussing what's taking place in the Channel, banging on about law and order, we're not afraid to do the absolute lot of it.
Yes, and if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we'll be saying it.
Make sure you're here 9:30am till 12pm, every single weekday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
Welcome back. Now let's talk electrical safety in pubs. 3 years ago, a little boy, Harvey Tyrrell, was tragically killed after suffering a huge electrical shock when he touched defective lighting at the King Harold pub in Romford, East London. He was just 7 years old. The owner of the King Harold was sentenced to 9 years in prison for manslaughter. Now, of course, nothing can be done to bring Harvey back. But one MP is campaigning for a change in the law to bring in mandatory regular checks on the electrics in pubs. And Andrew Rosendale, Conservative MP for Romford, joins me now. So you are trying to change the law. Your inspiration, as we said in the introduction, is Harvey, who was 7 years old. Just, do you have a bit more detail on what exactly happened to him?
Well, Gloria, this is a really tragic situation. A young lad with his mum going out to a pub for lunch, as you do. And, you know, the young lad's running around. He touches a railing. Somehow, I don't know, but that railing is linked into electricity. And this huge power surged through his body, and he pretty much died on the spot. Nothing could be done to save him. And what's happened here is that the pub owner has been totally irresponsible. The electrics were not properly maintained and checked. No one from the council is obliged to come in and make sure they're doing them. There's no certification. So it's a loophole. It's a dangerous loophole which has led to the tragic death of a young child. And so the law needs to change, or certainly regulations need to be much stricter to avoid this from happening again.
And some of the things that you have proposed in your proposed change to the law are, for example, checks every 5 years as a minimum, with local authorities given a range of factors to consider as to whether this should be more frequent. But just even those checks every 5 years at a minimum, is that the local authority that's got to pay for that, the pub that's got to pay for it? Somebody's going to have to cough up.
Oh, yeah, no, it's the pub. I mean, look, if you're running a business, it's your responsibility to make sure that it's safe for customers to come into the pub or whichever business it might be. So, of course, they would have to pay to be certain that the venue that they're hosting people in is safe for the public to enter. But what I'm saying is that the councils have no obligation, our local council had no obligation to check that the pub in question, the King Harold pub, was actually safe and to give them certification. So what I'm trying to do here is to say that, look, when you go for an alcohol licence, you don't get that unless you can also prove that your pub is safe for customers. So you link the two together. So the council would then have the power to not give a licence if they thought the premises was unsafe.
And do you think they'd need any extra resources to do that, the local authorities, or do you think they've got the capacity to check those checks, as it were?
Well, the owners would, of course, have to fund any costs. So I'm not expecting the taxpayer, the local council taxpayer, to pay any more for the cost of that. If you want to run a business, you want to own a pub, then you have to, you're obligated to make sure that it's safe for your customers, and you have to demonstrate that you've done all the necessary checks.
And lots of people think that when laws happen to all of us, then it's the government. That's the only vehicle that can really propose a law, the executive, in their weekly cabinet meetings when they decide what the priorities are. But there is another way, isn't there? Just explain the way that you are trying to change the law and the success of that actually being able to be changed.
What I'm keen not to do is to create more bureaucracy, more red tape, more expense for either the businesses or for the council, or for anybody else. I believe in small government, but you do have to have certain standards that everyone has to adhere to. If you don't have those standards, then tragedies like this will happen. So I think in all walks of life, there must be an absolute maximum freedom, but freedom with responsibility. And it's not responsible to run any kind of business or public venue if customers can walk in and their lives could be at threat.
What are your chances of getting this law, getting it into action?
So, Gloria, you know as well as I do, because you've been there and you know what it's like, bills don't go through unless government give it time. Yeah. This is a 10-minute rule bill. I don't know if you had 10-minute rule bills. I'm sure you did.
I never did, actually.
You never did? Oh, my goodness.
I didn't have the confidence. So you have to sort of traipse up and down and do that thing, and then you don't know if you're going to get success.
It's a rigmarole, but it's a good purpose to it, because what it does is that although the 10-minute rule bills almost never become law, it forces the government to consider what you're proposing. So I'm hoping that even though there probably won't be the legislative time to pass the bill through all the passages of a bill, what I'm hoping will happen is the government and the government ministers who were there yesterday watching and listening to what I was saying, I'm hoping that they will see the need to tighten up the laws on this and bring in new regulations or fit it into an existing piece of legislation later on. So hopefully government will adopt the idea. That's really what I'm trying to do.
Now, while I have you, can I ask you about a vote in Parliament tomorrow over the suspension of your colleague Owen Paterson, former Environment Secretary, sanctioned by a cross-party group of MPs for allegedly lobbying repeatedly for two companies that were paying him more than £100,000 a year. Suggestions that MPs who have a vote on this, now you might ponder whether that is reasonable in itself, might try to overturn that cross-party group of MPs.
Right, so I know Owen Paterson extremely well. He's a decent, honourable man. He did declare the fact that he was having outside earnings, as many MPs do. I don't know the full details of what it is they're accusing him of. It sounds serious, but I also think that whilst you have to have penalties for wrongdoing, you've got to make sure it's 100% fair. Now, in any situation, if you're accused of something, you surely have a right of appeal. So I think that this should be reviewed. A lot of questions being asked about the procedures they followed, evidence not being looked at, himself not actually being able to explain all the background to it, and a decision being made before they even looked into it fully. Now, I don't know if that's all true. I'm not part of that committee, but I want to see fairness. So if Owen feels that this is not fair, I think he should have the right to have a second go and to have different people examining what he did. This is a man's career. This is his entire life. It's also very tragic. His wife committed suicide. and now his career could be completely destroyed. If he's done wrong, then of course there has to be rules that apply to all of us, but it should be fair, and we should make 100% certain that this decision is right before he loses the seat and there's a potential by-election. I think that's the only fair thing to do.
Final question. I noticed earlier you talked to me about your belief in small government. I wonder how you feel about the ban on the sale of new petrol and diesel cars by 2030, phasing out gas boilers by 2035, sort of telling us to stop eating meat, fly less, all of it. I mean, this is not small government. This is quite interventionist government.
Well, you've sneaked in a question here I didn't expect, Gloria, but I'll be perfectly honest with you. I want to protect the environment. I want to do everything we all do. We all care. I'm a conservative. I believe in conserving everything that we cherish and that we're going to hand down to future generations. What I don't want to do is to make the country poor. What I don't want to do is to have government so overbearing that we finish up having to close down everything without analysing the real effects and costs of this. So I'm a little bit sceptical about some of these ideas.
Thank you. Thanks very much indeed for coming in. Really good to talk to you about your campaign. Later in the show, we'll have the latest in my special series of interviews, The Real Me. Today, Shadow Trade Secretary Emily Thornberry talks father figures and white van men. But first, it's the news with Rosie Wright.
Good afternoon. Let's get you up to date. 105 countries are going to sign a deal pledging to end and reverse deforestation by 2030 in the first major agreement at the COP26 summit. The countries involved represent 85% of the world's forests. Boris Johnson described the pledge as a chance to end humanity's long history as nature's conqueror and instead become its custodian. 2 Metropolitan Police officers have pleaded guilty to misconduct in public office after they shared images of the bodies of 2 murdered women. PC Dennis Jaffer and PC Jamie Lewis took photos of the murdered sisters, Bieber Henry and Nicole Smallman, on WhatsApp while they were protecting a police cordon. Insulate Britain has begun staging demonstrations outside of the southeast of England for the first time today. Around 60 protesters disrupted traffic in London, Birmingham and Manchester this morning. Meanwhile, 9 of the protesters have been told they face committal proceedings over the breaking of injunctions granted to national highways. MPs are calling for the rollout of smart motorways to be suspended due to safety concerns. The scheme, which uses the hard shoulder as a permanent traffic lane, has been criticised after multiple incidents where broken-down vehicles were hit by other drivers. Yesterday, demonstrators protested against smart motorways by marching to the Houses of Parliament. Antonio Conte has been appointed as the new Tottenham Hotspur head coach. Well, it comes after Spurs sacked Nuno Espirito Santo after only 4 months in charge. The former Inter Milan manager has signed an initial contract with the club until summer of 2023 and says he's extremely happy to return to coaching. You are up to date here on GB News. I'll be back with more on the day's top stories at 1 o'clock. But now back to Gloria.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for the political correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is the political correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
Hi, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
And we're hosting a show right here on GB News, 9:30am till 12pm, every single weekday. Call to the point.
We're going to be talking about all the big issues that matter to you at home in Britain.
Absolutely, whether it's holding politicians to account, discussing what's taking place in the Channel, banging on about law and order, we're not afraid to do the absolute lot of it.
Yes, and if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we'll be saying it.
Make sure you're here 9:30am till 12pm, every single weekday, right here on GB News, for To the Point.
Welcome back now. It's time for the latest in my series of special interviews with MPs where we go behind the politics and get to know the real person. Today I'm talking with Emily Thornberry, Shadow International Trade Secretary and Labour MP for Islington South and Finsbury. I began by asking her if the caricature of her as a fully paid up member of the North London metropolitan elite is fair.
I live in North London. I'm from Islington. I'm a barrister. I'm married to a really successful barrister who's become a judge, a High Court judge. He was knighted. He's now in the Court of Appeal. I'm very proud of him. And we've done well, you know, and I talk like this. But there's kind of another side to people. I mean, as with caricatures, there is some germ of truth, but quite often they paper over the real truth. So just like people say about Islington, you know, they say that they think about like Georgian squares and cappuccino bars and all of this, right? And that's absolutely true. But also, we've got the worst mental health statistics in the country. We've got, I think, the 4th or 5th worst child poverty statistics in the country. The reason that people vote Labour in my constituency very often is because they really need to have a Labour government that will give them a chance. And so if you go around the estates in my constituency, you know, they're well painted, the lifts work, but if you go into people's flats, you see real poverty. And that is a hidden side to Islington that people don't realise. You know, nearly half of the children in my primary schools are on free school dinners, you know, so therefore their parents are on benefits. It's a very different picture. And the same with me. So I've done well, but, you know, my parents split up when I was 7. We were chucked out. The bailiffs turned up. I remember they were wearing bowler hats. We were homeless. A Labour councillor helped my mum get a council house. And for that reason, we were able to stay together and helped her get onto benefits and all of that stuff. So I was on free school dinners, like half the kids in my primary schools. We had bags of clothes given to us and boxes of food. You know, we used to have this running joke about Campbell's meatballs, because one of the ladies used to give us food, but always give us Campbell's meatballs, and it didn't matter. We just hated them, and Mum used to keep them under the stairs. And if we wouldn't eat the food, she'd say, "You'll have to have the Campbell's meatballs if you don't." You know, so we were really poor. You know, we lived on, as I say, second-hand clothes and food parcels and all of that, free school dinners. And my main meal of the day was school lunch. I failed the 11+. I went to a school where the guy in charge of careers, when I asked him what he thought I would do with myself, he said, "Well, you can always visit people in prison," which I did, because I became a criminal barrister. And I kind of wish that he could see me now. Because I think the thing about, you know, the school that I was at was a school that sort of served the council estate that I was brought up on. And there was this feeling of, know your place, this is where you are, this is what's what. You know, don't make ructions, you know, everybody has their place in life and this is yours. And yeah, so it's a very mixed background, you know, so it's a mixed background. And then I had this kind of thing where my parents had met at university and we'd sort of, you know, they'd moved to Guildford where my mum would stop work and, you know, had 3 little kids, and my dad was a university lecturer at the LSE where he taught a whole lot of people. I mean, I meet lawyers sort of 10 years older than me, and they're always saying, "Did your father teach me?" You know, so he was at the LSE, and then they split up, and Dad disappeared, and he eventually went to work for the United Nations, and he would just sort of, he was this kind of incredibly glamorous figure that sort of flitted backwards and forwards. He would like turn up, you know, unannounced with gifts from India. I don't know what he'd been doing in India. Yeah, but he'd been in India. And when I was on my 15th birthday, Dad invited us to go to Africa. I'd been on a day trip to France. I hadn't been abroad. And we went to Africa for 2 weeks. We went to Zambia and Malawi. Completely blows your mind. And then came back again. So there was this kind of odd mixture. And when we saw Dad, he would go, "What are you doing with yourself? You know, what O-level, in those days, O-levels, what O-levels are you doing? What do you expect to do with your life?" You know, and I've got my careers teacher on the one hand telling me that I can visit people in prison. And then I've got, you know, my dad saying, "Well, what are you going to do with your life?" And my poor mum just trying to kind of hold things together. So it was a very mixed background, you know.
How often did you see your dad? So they divorced at 7,
Yeah.
and he came...
Well, so first of all, he disappeared for quite a long time. And when he disappeared for quite a long time, it was when we got chucked out of the house because there was like no money coming in at all. So that's when we couldn't pay the mortgage and all that stuff. So that's when that happened. And then he turned up again. I think he lived in Norway for quite a long time. I mean, honestly, I don't know. And then when I was about to turn 16, I had a massive row with my mum. I'd had many rows with my mum before then, but this was the massive row. And so she chucked me out. So I went to live with my dad in London, and he was living at that point in Hammersmith. So I lived with him. And then when I was 17, I went to school up in Shepherd's Bush. And when I was 17, Dad went to New York for the weekend, and he didn't come back because he'd got a job with the United Nations. And so because he had his expertise in Namibia, Southwest Africa. And Namibia was about to go independent, and Dad had really good connections with SWAPO, which was the organisation that in the end took over Namibia, you know, and so on. So that's why he was there, and he was there as a sort of political advisor to the United Nations, who were trying to kind of set up. And actually, Namibia is one of the great success stories of the United Nations. Nobody knows about it because it worked. Anyway, he did that. And then he did peacekeeping all over the world. You know?
What's quite interesting when you speak about your dad, you speak about his achievements, and you go and you move off the relationship that you had with him to speak about his achievements. Was he a good dad?
He was a terrible father. He was the most terrible father, but he was a great man. So it was this mixture, you know. So he was Irish, he was very charming. He was a kind of like, you know, he was an Irish rover. I mean, he was like, you know, he'd light up a room. He was, as I say, very charismatic. He was very internationalist to his bones. He was, you know, very much of the left. He was a great lover of people, particularly a lover of women. He married many, many times and had loads of girlfriends. But he was a terrible father, because of father, you need to have consistency, you know, affection, you need to have some stability. He didn't have any of that.
How did that affect you? How old were you when he first married again, or when you were aware that he had a girlfriend?
Well, the first I was aware was when I was 7, because the splitting up of the marriage was pretty kind of like, yeah, it was a bit of a thing. And he had a child, and the child looked just like him, and the child lived in the town. And
my goodness!
All of that. So
and you're aware of this at the age of 7.
Yeah. So you know about that. So I didn't get on particularly well with my first stepmother, although actually she was a really remarkable woman, and there are times when I realise I've learned so much from her. In fact, I met a variety of different women through my father and through my father's various marriages that I would never have anything to do with. You know, I learnt about, and their different perspectives on life and so on. But, you know, I also felt kind of quite sad for my dad, who was just like a great romantic, and every time, you know, he'd fall in love again, and this was the time, and this was going to be happiness, and this time it would work, and it never did, you know? And then, you know, and he never managed to keep any long-term bonds with anybody, really. I mean, he did with me, because I was his oldest child. But, you know, Peter, his son who lived in Norway, wouldn't speak to him. My brothers wouldn't speak to him. You know, I've got 2 half-sisters in France who just like...
Really?
Yeah. I mean, it's really sad, actually.
Is your dad still with us?
No. So that was the other sad thing, really. So he'd been in Bosnia. He'd been peacekeeping in Bosnia and met someone there, and he was like on this little island off the coast of Croatia, miles and miles and miles away from anywhere. and at the tender mercies of this particular woman, and started to get dementia.
When was this? So this was...
So it was really, you know, for somebody who'd like burnt all your bridges, do you know what I mean? After the pursuit of love, you know, this is the one, and she definitely wasn't the one. She definitely wasn't the one. And I remember saying to him, I'm really worried about your dad. You know, I think we need to make some long-term plans. And she looked me in the eyes and said, I will always look after him. Well, a year later, he arrives in Heathrow in a wheelchair saying, I have dementia, Emily, look after me. You know, and his bank account has largely been emptied and all of this. You know, so this is what happens. And nobody wanted to have anything to do with him, but he was my dad. And my brother Jim, who's like a really good soul, actually, I mean, I had a general election coming up. I had, you know, all sorts of stuff going on with my family, you know, A-levels and O-levels, GCSEs and Lord knows what going on with my family. So I was really, really busy. So Jim found an old people's home for him to move into. And then I did the visiting. So I would go and see him. And actually, over the next few years, he had this thing called Lewy bodies dementia, which is a type of Parkinson's. Normally people get Parkinson's and then they get Lewy bodies. And Lewy bodies is horrible. All dementia is horrible, but this is a really horrible form of dementia. You get these visions, and he would get visions about children, which is ironic, and children in need, and children desperate. And he would get really upset. And he would say, the children, which is quite hard. And there was nothing could be done about it. You couldn't give any of the anti-dementia drugs that you can give to people who have other types of dementia. So he had to live with all of this. And it came in waves. And he would say to me, it's a bit like being in the sea, Emily. Sometimes I'm swimming, and then sometimes I'm drowning. And I'd make sure that I saw him in the morning because he was more compos mentis in the morning, and by the afternoon he was sort of losing it. And I started off really, really resenting this, you know, because he'd left me when I was 7. He'd left me when I was 17. There were children all over the world, quite frankly, whose belief in themselves was not what it should be, quite often, because of the behaviour of their dad. And he had been completely irresponsible and totally selfish, but I still loved him, and he was there by himself. And I forgave him. And for me, it came like a blessing, you know? Because there's an awful lot of energy used up in anger, yeah? Or, I mean, like, that's who he was. And actually, I learned so much from having a dad like that. A lot of negative stuff, but actually, I am who I am. You know, and I'm a mixture of my mum, and I'm a mixture of my dad, and I'm a mixture of my experiences from my childhood. And it's all right. And when he died, I was there during the day before he died. And as I said, he was Irish, and he was lying on his bed, and I was stroking his hair, and I was singing these Irish songs to him. And then he went to sleep, and then I went home, and then I got a call saying that he'd died. But he died in the way that he would ever want to die. He was in bed. He was a great favourite in the home. He used to think that he was back in the United Nations because everybody working in the home came from all over the world, right? So he used to think that this was the Philippines representative. It was very funny. Anyway, and he was in this bed, and there were 7 women, I was told, sitting around his bed from all over the world, weeping as he died. That was the way he'd want to go. I mean, you know, and I was sad. I was sad when he went, and the funeral, I cried.
Do you think it affected your ability to form relationships, or your relationships with men, when the most significant man in your life let you down in so many ways?
Well, I was really lucky, actually, because at the age of 22, I met my husband. In fact, my parents had met when they were 22, so I met Chris at 22, and I thought, well, he's not obviously going to leave me, so there's no point, you know. And it actually took him about 8 years for him to persuade me that he wasn't going to leave. So we got married when I was 30, and we had the first child when I was 31. And it was like I just needed that amount of time, and he just sort of stuck it out, you know, and always believed me, always believed me, always believed in me, and always loved me, and I needed it. And I wouldn't be who I am without him, without a doubt. Not with that sort of dad. You're right.
Now, sort of to go back to that initial question about why some people have the views about you that they do.
Yeah.
In 2014, you resigned from the Shadow Cabinet after sending a tweet which was thought to mock a house with an England flag.
Yeah.
Let's just set the record straight on this. Everybody interpreted your motivations from that tweet and interpreted snobbery or whatever it was. What did you mean by that tweet?
So, I mean, it was that we were there at the Rochester by-election, from what I can remember. And what I used to do is, before the days of, you know, the other Instagram and so on, but on Twitter, I would quite often take photographs in order to give people an insight into a by-election. So I think I took a picture of a dog with a rosette and the monster raving loony party, and some people had made their own posters. Some kids had made some posters saying "Vote Felix," and they'd done their own drawings. And then I came across this house that was covered in England flags. It didn't just have one. I mean, it had you couldn't see out the windows. So I put that up as well, and I'd put a whole series, and I'd called them "Images from Rochester" or something like that. And so that one went up as well, and then I just went on and carried on knocking on doors and stuff. And I think I went to a parents' evening, and then I was on my way back from that, and my phone just went crazy with all this kind of what's going on, and and I was thinking, and then I was being told you're going to have to resign, and basically I was told, it doesn't really matter what you thought. What matters is what people think you thought, and of course people did interpret it, and pour maybe some of their own feelings into this, which I hadn't. Anyway, there we are. So, but in the end, I wouldn't want to do anything that would harm the Labour Party. I mean, the Labour Party gave me my house when I was a kid and I was homeless. The Labour Party is a cause. My mum was a Labour councillor. I have been Labour all my life. I'm not going to undermine the Labour Party. People tell me that I have done something to harm the Labour Party. I'll do anything to repair that, because I believe in the Labour Party. I believe the only force that can push our country in the right direction is the Labour Party. That's why I'm in politics. So yeah, so there we are.
Is that the hardest thing? The hardest thing you've been through in politics, that particular episode?
I think so, because it kind of kept coming back. And also, what was really hard about it was this idea that I was in some way being snobbish. I mean, I've been brought up on a council estate with in a house that looked very similar to that. My brother, was a builder. He didn't have a white van, he had a red van. I've got my other brother works for Sainsbury's, drives the trucks for Sainsbury's. I've got a sister who's a bus driver. I mean, what? It's like, why are people saying this? I mean, anyway. I mean, that's how it is. That's how it is. And that was kind of hurtful. That was hurtful. The idea that I would sneer at people and people would make assumptions about me and not even bother to try to find out who I am. That, I think, and then you feel as though you're just being, as you said, being used as a caricature, and although there is some truth in it, there's a lot of, if you just think that's the only truth, then you don't see the real truth.
Well, we found out a lot about you today, and we've cleared up a lot of those things, and thank you for being so open and sharing the real you with me.
That's all right, it's been a pleasure.
You've been watching The Briefing with me, Gloria de Piero. The show is back tomorrow at noon, Prime Minister's Question Time. Up next, it's On the Money with Liam Halligan. I'll be back with Liam between 2 and 3, but for now, it's time for your weather forecast. Thank you for being with us.
Hello again. Plenty of bright blue skies today. Sunny spells for many, especially inland. There will be further showers, however, particularly near the coast. And it will feel cold in the wind and chilly overnight with a touch of frost in places. Low pressure is still close by. It's to the north of the UK and we're dragging in this colder northwesterly airflow, but the isobars less tightly packed compared to Monday, and so less blustery, less unsettled on the whole, and for many it's a fine bright day with plenty of sunshine. Showers inland, I think, particularly for the Midlands, southern and southeast England, perhaps northeast England as well. Showers fairly few and far between. They'll mostly be appearing into northern and western coastal areas, and in that blustery breeze it will feel on the cool side, 9 to 13 Celsius typically. Under clear skies then, temperatures fall away overnight, a touch of frost forming in places. But further showers will feed into northern and western coasts and some more prolonged rain at times for northeast Scotland. And then that sinking south into Aberdeenshire on a brisk breeze. Frost-free in the north with that breeze, but otherwise temperatures dipping to 1 to 3 Celsius typically inland, perhaps -1 in some sheltered spots. So chilly starts to Wednesday, frost first thing, a few fog patches for the Midlands, southern and southeast England. Soon enough though, this area of cloud and some fairly prolonged showers pushes through parts of eastern England, reaching East Anglia by the afternoon. That brisk breeze in the North Sea will feel cold, and it will be breezy in the west with further showers here. But inland, central slice of the UK seeing a lot more dry and bright weather with some sunshine. The showers continue to topple south across East Anglia into southeast England on Wednesday evening. Eventually, most of the showers die away. Still some for West Wales, Devon, Cornwall, northern Scotland, but another frosty night in store and a chilly start once again on Thursday. Cloudier skies appear on Friday, turning unsettled in the northwest.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at